What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable wildcard walks onto a daytime talk show stage? Total chaos. And it only took 25 seconds for Joy Behar to storm off her own show after Charlie Sheen crossed a line no one saw coming. Before we dive into this insane meltdown, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that get buried by morning. Hit that subscribe button now, because you won't find coverage like this anywhere else. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be about Charlie Sheen discussing his new memoir and reflecting on his career. Instead, it turned into one of the most uncomfortable, brutal television moments in recent memory. What started as polite conversation between Joy Behar and the controversial actor quickly spiraled into a war of words that left the entire studio in shocked silence. The interview began innocently enough. Charlie walked out wearing dark sunglasses and a leather jacket, which already had Joy raising her eyebrows. The audience gave him a warm welcome, maybe hoping for some of that trademark Charlie Sheen humor they remembered from his sitcom days. Joy started things off with what seemed like a friendly question about his book and his journey through Hollywood. But you could feel the tension immediately. Charlie wasn't giving the rehearsed, media-trained answers that daytime television loves. He was being raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest in a way that seemed to make Joy uncomfortable from the start. She tried steering the conversation towards safer topics, asking about his family and his kids, but Charlie kept deflecting, making jokes that landed with awkward silence rather than laughter. Then Joy made her first mistake. She brought up his past controversies, the very public meltdowns, the headlines that had dominated entertainment news for years. She did it with that specific tone, the one that sounds like concern but feels like judgment. She asked him if he regretted the way he'd behaved during what she called his darker years. Charlie's entire demeanor shifted. He took off his sunglasses and stared directly at Joy. "You know what I regret?" he said. "I regret coming on shows where people pretend to care about redemption stories, but really just want to pick at old wounds for ratings." The audience went quiet. You could hear people shifting in their seats. Joy tried to laugh it off, saying she was just asking what everyone wanted to know, that this was part of having an honest conversation. But Charlie wasn't backing down. "Honest," he shot back. "You want honest? Let's be honest, then. This whole setup, these questions you're asking, they're not about understanding or growth. They're about getting me to say something crazy so you can have a viral moment." Joy's face hardened. She wasn't smiling anymore. "Charlie, I think you're being a bit defensive here. I'm simply trying to have a conversation about your book, which you came here to promote." "Right, my book," Charlie said, leaning forward. "The one you clearly didn't read, because if you had, you'd know I address all of this in there. But you don't actually care about what I wrote. You care about the circus, the spectacle." The other hosts at the table looked at each other nervously. No one knew whether to jump in or stay quiet. Joy tried to regain control, her voice getting sharper. "I absolutely read your book, Charlie. And what I read was a lot of deflection and blame shifting. At some point, don't you have to take responsibility for your own actions?" That's when things really started heating up. Charlie let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Take responsibility? From you? That's rich, Joy. Really rich." What's that supposed to mean? Joy snapped, her professional composure starting to crack. Charlie didn't hesitate. It means you've built an entire career sitting behind this desk, judging everyone else's mistakes, everyone else's failures, everyone else's humanity. It's easy to point fingers when you've never actually been in the arena, isn't it? Joy's eyes narrowed. I've been in this industry for decades, Charlie. I've worked my way up through actual journalism, not just playing make-believe on sitcoms. Oh, it was on now. The entire studio felt like it might explode. Charlie stood up slightly in his chair, and you could see security getting ready to move closer. Actual journalism, Charlie said, his voice rising. Is that what we're calling this? Sitting here in your comfortable chair, asking gotcha questions to people who've actually lived, who've actually struggled? You know what your problem is, Joy? You've never had real consequences for anything. You say whatever you want. You judge whoever you want. And then you go home to your perfect little bubble. Joy stood up now too, her hands gripping the edge of the table. How dare you come onto my show and talk to me like that? You don't know anything about my life, about what I've been through. Then why do you pretend to know about mine? Charlie fired back. Every question you've asked has been designed to make me look like a mess, like I'm still that guy from the headlines. But you know what? At least I'm real. At least when I screw up, I own it. I don't hide behind some fake journalist persona. The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked horrified. Others looked like they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. One of the other hosts tried to interject, suggesting they take a commercial break, but Joy waved her off. Real? Joy said, her voice shaking with anger. You want to talk about being real? You've spent years blaming everyone else for your problems. Your bosses, your ex-wives, the media, everyone but yourself. And now you come here, on my show, and you have the audacity to lecture me about authenticity? Charlie picked up his coffee mug from the table and took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving Joy's. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, that it seemed to infuriate her even more. I'm not lecturing you, Charlie said calmly, which somehow made it worse. I'm just calling it like I see it. And what I see is someone who's made millions sitting in judgment of people like me. People who've actually taken risks, who've actually put themselves out there beyond asking questions from note cards. Joy's face was turning red. Get off my stage, she said quietly. What? Charlie said, cupping his ear dramatically. I said, get off my stage, Joy shouted, loud enough that everyone in the studio jumped. You come here, you disrespect me, you disrespect this show, you disrespect our audience. We invited you here as a guest, to give you a platform, and this is how you behave? Charlie stood up fully now, straightening his jacket. You invited me here for content, Joy. Let's not pretend this was some act of charity. You wanted Charlie Sheen, the train wreck, the controversy. Well, congratulations, you got him. Security! Joy called out, pointing at Charlie. But before security could even move, Charlie held up his hands. Don't worry, I'm leaving. But let me say one more thing. He turned to face the cameras directly. For everyone watching at home, this right here, this is what's wrong with television now. People like Joy, sitting up on their high horses, acting morally superior while they profit off everyone else's pain. They don't want healing. They don't want growth. They want drama. And they want ratings. Joy was livid. You are the most ungrateful, arrogant, washed-up has-been I have ever had on this show. We gave you a chance to show people you'd changed, and instead you proved you're still the same selfish, delusional man you've always been. The words hit hard. You could see something flash across Charlie's face. Hurt mixed with rage. He grabbed his microphone pack and ripped it off, tossing it onto the chair. "Washed up?" he said quietly, dangerously. "I've forgotten more about this business than you'll ever know. At least when people remember me, they'll remember someone who was actually interesting, who actually took chances. You're just another talking head who'll be replaced the second your ratings drop. And they're dropping, aren't they, Joy? That's why you needed me here today." That was the final straw. Joy didn't even respond. She just ripped off her own microphone, threw it down on the table with a loud crash, and turned to walk off the stage. The other hosts were calling after her, the producers were scrambling, and the audience sat in absolute shock. But Joy kept walking. She headed straight for the exit doors behind the set, her heels clicking loudly in the stunned silence. She pushed through the doors so hard they slammed against the walls. Charlie stood there for a moment, watching her go, then looked back at the remaining hosts at the table. "Well," he said with a slight smirk, "I guess that's my cue." He gave a small wave to the confused audience, some of whom were applauding uncertainly, others just sitting with their mouths open. Charlie walked across the stage in the opposite direction Joy had gone, heading toward the main studio exit. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one more time, pointing at the cameras. Remember, folks, they wanted real. Can't handle it when it actually shows up. And with that, Charlie Sheen walked off the View's stage, leaving behind complete chaos. The remaining hosts sat there, looking at each other in disbelief. The studio audience was buzzing with confused chatter. Producers were running around frantically trying to figure out what to do next. The cameras stayed on the empty stage for a few more seconds, capturing the abandoned chairs, the discarded microphones, and the absolute mayhem of what had just happened. No one knew if Joy was coming back. No one knew how to salvage what was left of the show. This wasn't your typical talk show disagreement. This was a full-scale nuclear meltdown between two people who clearly had years of resentment bubbling under the surface. Every word had been calculated to hurt. Every response designed to cut deeper than the last. Charlie had come to promote his book, but instead had torn apart the entire format of daytime television. He'd called out the hypocrisy, the performative nature of these interviews, and he'd done it in the most Charlie Sheen way possible, by burning every bridge in sight. And Joy, known for her quick wit and sharp tongue, had finally met someone who wouldn't back down, who wouldn't play the game, who was willing to go just as hard as she was. She had tried to control the narrative, to steer the conversation where she wanted it to go, but Charlie had hijacked the whole thing. The tension had been building from the very first question. You could feel it in the way they looked at each other, in the pauses between responses, in the forced smiles that never reached their eyes. They both knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. This was a battle, and they both came ready to fight. When Charlie accused Joy of exploiting people's pain for ratings, he'd touched a nerve that clearly went deep. Joy's reaction wasn't just anger at being called out on her own show. It was fury at having her entire career, her entire purpose, questioned by someone she clearly saw as beneath her. And when Joy called Charlie a washed-up has-been, she'd gone for the jugular. She knew exactly what would hurt him most. The suggestion that he was irrelevant, that he was desperate for attention, that he needed the view more than they needed him. That was designed to destroy him. But instead of crumbling, Charlie had hit back even harder. His comment about Joy being replaceable, about her ratings dropping, that was personal. That was meant to make her feel as worthless as she'd tried to make him feel. The whole confrontation had escalated so quickly that no one had time to stop it. One minute they were talking about a book, the next they were in a screaming match about authenticity, respect, and the entire nature of celebrity culture. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrible but impossible to look away from. Security had been ready to escort Charlie out, but they hadn't needed to. He'd been ready to leave on his own terms, to make his own dramatic exit. But Joy had beaten him to it. She'd refused to give him the satisfaction of kicking him off. Instead, she'd quit her own show, walked off her own stage, left her own production in chaos. That moment, when Joy ripped off her microphone and threw it down, that was pure rage. That wasn't a strategic exit. That was someone who had completely lost control, who couldn't spend one more second in the same room as their opponent. The way she'd stormed off, not even looking back at her co-hosts or the audience, showed just how deeply Charlie's words had cut. And Charlie's exit was equally dramatic. The casual wave, the final pointed comment to the cameras, the complete lack of remorse. He walked off that stage like he'd won, like he'd proven his point, like he'd exposed something important about the fake nature of these shows. The remaining hosts had no idea what to do. They couldn't go to commercial without it looking like complete chaos. They couldn't continue the show without their main host. They just sat there, frozen, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The audience reactions told the whole story. Some people were Team Charlie, applauding his willingness to speak truth to power, to call out the hypocrisy of daytime talk shows. Others were Team Joy, horrified that a guest would be so disrespectful, so ungrateful for the platform he'd been given. But everyone agreed on one thing. They'd just witnessed something unprecedented. Talk show arguments happen all the time, but not like this. Not with this level of personal venom, not with this complete breakdown of professional courtesy, not with both the host and the guest walking off the set. The thing is, both of them had valid points buried in all that anger. Charlie was right that daytime talk shows often exploit controversy for ratings, that they invite controversial guests specifically hoping for dramatic moments. And Joy was right that Charlie had a history of deflecting responsibility, of blaming others for his own mistakes. But neither of them cared about being right in that moment. They cared about winning, about getting the last word, about inflicting maximum damage on the other person. This wasn't a debate. This was warfare. As Charlie walked through those studio doors and out into the hallway, as Joy disappeared into her dressing room area, they left behind one of the most intense, uncomfortable, and absolutely riveting moments in talk show history. The kind of moment that people would be talking about for years. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't planned. This was real emotion, real anger, real conflict exploding in real time on live television. And that's what made it so compelling, so shocking, so impossible to forget.